How you know it's on? Hi everybody. So we're gonna go over chapters 1 through 3 of Metu Neter today. It was a really good read so far. I really enjoyed it. The name of the first, well, actually, we're gonna start with the preface. The preface of the book is called The Divine Plan. This is Ezekiel.
Hey.
Ezekiel has been reading the book with me, so we both will be doing the book club for this book together. So, did you read any notes about the preface? Do you have any input on the divine plan?
I actually haven't even gotten into that part yet because
That's the very first beginning of the book. The preface is the first. Okay, so the preface is, it kind of talks about obviously what the entire book entails, but one quote that I got from the very first page I'll read to you. Aunt Lizzie said hi. Hi, Aunt Lizzie.
Hey.
One quote that I read to you is, "It is only when facts concerning nature or the ideas about religion are linked to each other and to the whole that a science or religion is formed." And I like that quote. That quote spoke to me. I'm really big on facts right now, especially the way the world is right now with everyone's emotions trumping over facts. I think that we have to come to a point where we have to put our feelings aside and stop putting our feelings in front of facts and stop, saying, oh, if this fact doesn't sit well with my feelings, this fact does not exist or it doesn't apply. And I do believe that nature and religion are connected to each other, because when you think about any religion, the God has created everything and God is in everything. So if you're going to say that God created everything and God is in everything, you can't just apply that to humans, right? You have to apply that to all the animals and all the plants, because God created all of that. So, once you take the science of the plants and animals, and you connect that with the religion that God is in all of it, it is like a nice combination. And that's why I make my jewelry with the crystals, and I have, I talk about herbs and all those different things, because, God is in all of that, and it's also a science to it. So, yeah. So that's what I got from the a quote from the first page of the preface. Another note that I have here says, man's perception of the world doesn't change the reality that the world is made up of an infinite amount of unified and interdependent agents. So just because you perceive the world to be, it's just me, myself, and I, it's me, we have this no new friends and solo dolo and all this stuff. Just because that's your perception, it doesn't change the fact that we do live in a world of an infinite amount of agents. Like, there's an infinite amount of beings on this world, and they're all interdependent. And one thing I think about is, it's so crazy. I think about like the Russian doll. When you think of your organelles in a cell, and if your organelles have to be working together, and they have to be working unified, and they have to be working in a system for the cell to work, and the cells have to be working unified and in a system to make the tissue to work, and tissue has to be unified for the organs, and the organs have to be unified for the system, and the systems have to be organized for the body. Now, if one cell in the body messes up, it messes up the whole body. But think about, like, if one organelle is out of order, it messes up the entire body. So it's like, it's so crazy how something so small can affect such a huge being. And then this is happening in so many different instances. Like in the air right now, it's so many, like, things within a thing right now in front of us. And even us, like, it doesn't just stop with us. Like, we're a small being. We have to, work together as beings to make a community, and communities have to work together as beings for, Earth to go and ecosystems and so on and so forth, and solar system. So it's like it doesn't just stop with us. Like we're a small blip in the whole system. And just because we perceive that we are the end and it ends with us and everything evolves around us, it doesn't change the fact that we are just a blip in this interdependent universe that is infinite. I think that is so important to keep in mind when you go about your day. You are special, but you are a very small blip of special.
Well, everyone is.
Yeah. So and the last note that I have for the preface is unity, harmony, and order in society can't be achieved through lawmaking and policing. It can only be achieved by man's effort to intuit the knowledge of the divine plan. So, going into detail about that, I think that's true because, even with all the laws that we have out in place,
it doesn't stop all the evil and all the bad things we do.
No. It's up to the person if they want to stop what it is that they're doing. You don't gain an appreciation for life or or people's journeys until you are connected to the divine plan, until you do go on the journey to knowing yourself and knowing others and knowing love. That's the only way that's going to happen. So, you can write all the laws down you want, if
it's
it doesn't,
not going to change anybody else's choices unless they make an effort or you make a big impact on their perspective.
Yep. And that all goes to, being in tune with the divine plan. And that's one thing that me and Trevor talk about a lot is that, we grew up in the church, and while we don't fully believe in everything the church believes in, at the same token, it was like that level of morale and values and social discipline that we learned being in church with our elders and with our cousins and with our youth. Like, we learned all that going to church on Sundays and going to church functions and stuff like that. And a lot of kids don't have that now, and it does seem to be like a correlation with the further children go from the church, the more like out of touch they're becoming, because they feel like they don't have to answer to anybody or they don't have to answer to anything. Do you agree with that? Or you could disagree if you want. But that's just the preface. So how about chapter 1? What are your thoughts or your notes on chapter 1?
Well, as a kid, I always thought that I wouldn't probably understand all the complicated stuff that are going around, especially since not really all of us know what's going on. But as I got to read chapter 1, I realized how simple it was for any of the complicated things to even happen.
Mm-hmm.
On page 2 and 3, I even recognize that all religious and science have a common ground in civilization. And that is just even the main topic of chapter 1.
Mm-hmm.
But how did you feel about civilization being the common ground of almost everything?
Well, okay, so civilization being the common ground for everything. Well, okay, I know what you're talking about. And just to, kind of repeat, in that chapter, they were talking about how it's important to know the foundations of every civilization. And when you learn about the foundations of every civilization, it's important to know the culture of the people who started that civilization. Because when you know about the culture of the people that started that civilization, you can understand why they had certain laws that they did, or they had certain practices that they did, or their justice system was the way it was. You know what I'm saying? Like, they gave examples, but one I could think of is, okay, about the Egyptians, right? And you know how, they bury the dead. and you know about their caste systems, and you know about
the mummified system,
yeah,
drag up the body.
But in order to those things, but in order to understand why they did those things, you would have to know the people. You would have to know, okay, well, what was y'all religion like? Like, how did y'all interact with each other? Like, who were you? Like, why did you have things the way you did? You know what I mean?
Does so basically, to further understand, you had to be that person, or you had to literally live that way to understand it fully. Otherwise, we can only comprehend just the gist of it.
No. What I'm saying is, when you're learning about a civilization, you have to learn about how a civilization was formed, right? When you learn about the history of America, don't you have to learn about how America was formed? And when you learn about how it was formed, you have to learn about the people that formed it. Like, what was the culture of the people that formed it? What was their religion? Like, when you talk about the foundation of America, it was Christians, people that wanted religious freedom that came over here. That's the story. But, like, you get what I'm saying? Like, you have to learn about the people to learn about why they do the things that they do. Make sense? Okay. So, chapter 1 talks about the willed and the automatic part of your brain. Willed is the part that has to be instructed. Those are the things that you have to tell yourself and remind yourself to do. Automatic is directed by an omniscient factor, like an all-seeing factor. What happens when the willed side is no longer taught by the one that is also limited in knowledge? What if it was also taught by the omniscient factor? Okay, so the willed side is the side that has to be taught something, right? And your automatic side is the side that you don't even think about. Like, you don't think about breathing. You don't think about, walking. You just know, hey, I got to go to my car. So you're telling yourself, hey, I got to go to my car. But you're not thinking about having to pick your feet up and having to walk. You're not thinking about those parts. And that's the part that your automatic side automatically knows. I know I got to walk to my car. But what happens when the part that is automatic becomes willed? What if you have to remind yourself to move every foot? Like, oh yeah, I gotta move this foot, this foot, this foot, and this many steps to get to the door, and then I gotta turn the door. What happens when you have to tell yourself to do every step to get to the car?
I don't even think our mind would even be fast enough to even do that. Especially even the breathing part, or even pumping up blood.
It's a lot, right? So, with that being said, we agree that there are certain things that should be automatic, that should be omniscient. Do we agree or disagree? In chapter 1, there's also notes that talk about the stages in the spiritual development of individuals and nations. There's 3 types of people. The first type of person relies most on their willed part for survival and nourishment. These are external people. These are the people that, they need to be instructed. They need to be told what to do. This is external. These are extroverts. This is the left side of people. The second type of person relies most on the omniscient intelligence of their automated part. So these are people that are introverted, they're internal. These may be people that are very spiritual or religious, but they're not proactive with their spiritualism. And the third person is the person who has balance of both. And in the book, they correlate the Western man and some Orientals to the person who is willed, who is extrovert, and it relies on external tools. And they correlate some Orientals and the Black race with being the group of people who rely on the automatic part, people who are just moving and, they're directed by the omniscient factor. They're directed by the religion, but they're not proactive with the religion. There's no instruction with that. And then they correlate the ancient Egyptians with a group of people who had the balance of both. They had external tools and they also had the internal. They still were in tune with their spirit. Um, this chapter also goes on to say that the issues that we have with the world today is because we're being ruled by people who are solely willed. There is no balance. They're only willed people, people who only rely on external tools. And we see that because religion is dying, which is an internal tool that we have that, we need to keep alive. Religions are dying off. People are feeling like they don't have to answer to anyone. Karma doesn't exist. There is no heaven. There is no hell. There is no like moral necessities. People are fighting against values and
characteristics, personality,
and the natural way of living and all of that, because it doesn't correlate with their desire to go against those things. And so they're creating tools and they're going outward. People are becoming more external. People are becoming more instructional, and because we are taking spiritualism and religion and all that stuff, and we're separating the two with the internal dying off, it's creating a lot of chaos. It's creating a lot of disconnect between people. What else does chapter 1 say? The dominant culture in the world is of the external being. People are directed outside of themselves and religions, scriptures, sermons, and priests. Yeah, that was a good example. Like, people are being directed outside of themselves. So, like, instead of going internal, like, there was a metaphysical church we used to go to, and they would meditate, and that is a form of going inward. And most religions don't do that. They use tools. They use their books. They use sermons. They use the priests. They don't go inward. And when you're constantly going outward and utilizing tools that are made also by other individuals who are also limited in their knowledge, it doesn't work, because that limits your knowledge. If my knowledge is limited and your knowledge is limited, and I'm teaching you, what's going to happen?
I feel like most of all what would happen would be you wouldn't probably learned anything. It would all be maxed out in a certain percent of it.
Right.
Or we couldn't learn anything else. It will just be stuck.
Right. It wouldn't take much for us to reach a certain intellectual limit, because our knowledge is limited. I can't teach you what I don't know, right? So if I don't know it, you'll never be taught it, and it'll never be taught, right? So with that being said, the next point that I made, Africans and some Orientals go within themselves and they trance. Okay, yeah, I said that before. Like, some churches, they still go within themselves. They'll still trance. They'll still meditate and do all those things. The first chapter also goes into the left brain hemisphere, and that's correlated with being in charge of separating us and the variety of things in our environment to each other. It helps to distinguish a variety of sounds made in verbal and thinking, speaking. It's also correlated with being extroverted, analytical, serial, linear, and segregative. The right side of the brain is in charge of relating us a variety of things in the environment, and it also enables us to unify the words we perceive into phrases, sentences, and so on, so we can comprehend. It's also related to being introverted, holistic, and congregative. These two are complementary to each other, yet they are incomplete by themselves. The left brain is responsible for man's inhumanity to man and social disharmony, because, like I said before, when you're not in touch with your internal being and your connection and the fact that everything is interdependent, you kind of like, it's not as easy for you to empathize with others. You're not seeing yourself in other people. When things happen to other people around you, it's like, oh, that's not me. And it's not even just people. It's things, period. Like, it's beings, period, all over the world. It's like, oh, those are just animals. Forget that. Or, oh, those are just, plants. Or those are just trees. Or that's just another planet. I'm not worried about that. Like, no, it's our responsibility to worry about all of this. So, because we don't use the right side of our brain as much, we are separated from each other, and it is why we are inhumane, because we don't empathize. And the right side is responsible for stagnation in physical technology, which is true when you think, because the right side is being, in the book, is being correlated with the African, black people, and they're always, and one thing that black people do complain about the church is they're stagnant and they don't move forward, and they don't, create the necessary tools to
prosper and move forward.
Right. Because they don't do those things, they're kind of, they're stuck in their ways, they're stuck in old ways, they're not evolving, they're not moving forward with the times. So they do complement one another. And then that's why harmony and unity is needed. Another note that I wrote about chapter 1 was that the left side has overtly influenced and dominated the cultures of the right side, which is true. Like I read a couple minutes ago in my notes like the churches, they have become more extroverted, and people are using tools more than they're going inward and meditating. And that's because the left side has taken over the church. The left side is putting separation in the church. I remember, I think it was my mom that told me, like, Sundays are the most separated days of the week, because that's when everybody goes into their separate buildings, to their separate religions. And that's because the left side has taken over the church. So they found ways to separate themselves, like, oh, my church believes in this piece, and my church believes in that, my church believes in that. So, like, we're not connected, we don't unite, we don't believe in the same thing, this, that, and the third. There's wars, and reading the Bible, we're going to the priest, and we're doing all that, but we're not going inward, and we're not talking to God on our own. We're not connecting ourselves with one another. We're not connecting ourselves with the land, and that's what's needed to bring social order and all that stuff. And on page 13 in the book, it breaks down the word religion. They use the front part of religion, RE, means to tie people back, and the LIGION part of the word is short for law or logic. And it wasn't created to oppose science, logic, or reason. So in a nutshell, religion is tying people back to something with which they had originally been one or belonged with by natural connectivity. In page 14, they go on to talk about religion, trance, and ancestors.
But in page 13, before we go on with page 14, if we were tied up to something because of what is said on page 13, as you cited, what would we even be tied to if religion wasn't even meant to be tied with science and logic? What do you think would be tied to it?
No, it is. That's what the word religion is. The RE is tying back, and the LIGION, that's law and logic. So it's tying you back to what you were naturally connected to, which is law and logic. And when you go inward, that's when you're connected to logic, and you're connected to science and the harmony of everything. And that was the divine power question you had. Like, how I want to know what the divine power is. Well, you have to go inward to find out. And that's why page 14 goes on to talk about the trance and meditation and ancestors, and going inward and being able to talk to our ancestors and talking to God. Does that make sense to you? I'm sorry, my throat dries, but but yeah, does that make sense to you? Okay. So going on to page 14, the title of that part is Religion, Trance, and Ancestors. Most cultures, more right brain, have a higher regard for women and their abilities to speak with their ancestors, women are the most right. Black women are the most right. Black women are the closest to God. Black women are the closest to the universe. They're the most right. They're the ones that hold life. A woman is born with every egg she'll ever give life to. She holds generations in her body. So those, like I just said, and that was a note from the book on page 14. You'll read about it. The cultures that are more right brain, the cultures that are more in harmony, introverted, religious, holistic, congregative, all those adjectives were used in the book. Those are the cultures that have a higher regard for women and their abilities to speak with the ancestors. Schools are starting to cater to the right side of the brain as they realize people learn more and faster with the right side and they retain more. That's true. My son, I have another son, he's 4, he's about to be 5, and his teacher, she teaches yoga in the school, she teaches meditation in the school, and it seems like the kids enjoy it. I see that in schools, or even on TV shows, like they talk about feelings more, and they talk about how everything is like a whole before you separate it. And with the way they're doing math, kind of different now. It's kind of starting it as a whole before it's broken down. It's weird, but I see what it is. Do you feel that way? Do you feel like there's more right-brained activities in school now? Do you know what I mean by right brain?
Not fully.
Okay. Going back to the earlier part of the chapter, the right brain part of the hemisphere is in charge of relating us in the variety of things in the environment, and it enables us to unify. So do you think there's more like things that promote unity and congregations in your school now? Like what?
Like, I guess just even in a simple concept like bullying.
Mm-hmm.
You have a whole bunch of people that are all coming together from it. And then even with racial discrimination, that's already been done and over with.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. They do have, like, the zero toleration for bullying and all that stuff is in the school. You're right. That is true. And then page 14 goes back to talking about how the left and right brain complement one another and racial differences go beyond physical traits. One of the things that the book discussed, especially in the preface, is how we can read things, and just because we're reading them, it doesn't mean that we're applying them. Like, I can read instructions on how to bake a cake. I didn't bake the cake just because I read the book. Does that make sense?
It didn't persuade you. It just helped you know how to do it.
Right. But did it bake the cake?
No.
So it didn't bake the cake. It didn't persuade me to bake the cake. I just read this book about baking the cake. That's what happened. And that's the same thing with spiritualism. That's the same thing with, all these other books that we're reading on mental health and physical health and eating right and working out. You could read all the things you want to read. You want to watch all the things you want to watch. But that's not going to make you do what it's telling you to do. And it's not going to make it achieved either just because you're reading it or you're watching it. What you have to do is you have to absorb it and you have to apply it. So how can we apply what we learned? In the first few pages, I talk about the importance of combining the left and right brain and how they complement one another, and how willed and automatic movements complement one another, and how the 3 main races, which is described in the book as Black, White, and Oriental, how all 3 of them bring something to the table and they complement one another. So how can we apply those first 15 pages of the book? Because we're not just going to read it just to be reading it. Like, we're going to apply it too. You know what I mean? What are some ways we could do that?
Well, through 1 to 15, so far from my understanding, I believe that if almost every single civilization isn't really that much of a common background, but something of a foundation we stand on. And with both pieces of our brain, they should probably work together instead of driving each other apart from our knowledge and our unity.
Okay.
And if we actually took that into effort, then we could probably even have the prosperity and love we always wanted, and even the respect that we would deserve.
I agree. I definitely agree. Now, what are some ways that we could apply that? We know that now. So what are some things that we could do to apply it?
Well, like we said, Allah isn't really going to do anything until we have people coming together to say something about it. So I guess maybe like a stand, or maybe just, I guess, a poll to see if we should keep this going, to keep everything right.
And when you say this, like, what exactly are you referring to?
I'm referring if everybody could have a graphic view of an agreement.
Oh, like a treaty? Like we should sit down and have a treaty?
Yeah.
But I would say that like, that's like the same thing as like writing a law. Like you could put it down on paper, you could write it, but if people aren't gonna fulfill it, or it's still gonna be some undertone, because especially when you're dealing with like treaties or any type of government paper, you have to deal with legalese, which is just like pretty words for law. And if you don't know how to read it and you know how to write it, it's very easy for people to be like, ooh, like there's a gray area where I could still do my BS. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? But it's just like you said earlier, like just because you write a law on it, it don't mean that people are going to follow it.
I'm trying to find a way to make it sound like I'm not trying to say a riot, because I don't think that would help all the way.
Oh, kind of like we should start having like not riots, but like I wouldn't even say protests either, but we should have like community meetings, community outings with one another. One thing I always like for a minute I had wanted to do was I wanted to get a projection screen, and I wanted to do movies under the stars events, but I wanted to do them for like documentaries, and it's a lot of like Black experience pieces of art coming out on video, and I wanted to do that, and I'll probably go into like the most Caucasian neighborhood and play that shit so that they could see, because I think education is key. It was a show on Netflix with Killer Mike, and one thing I liked about him that he stressed a lot was education, like teaching each other about each other's cultures and stuff like that. And that's why I wrote Show and Tell, because I feel like learning about each other is the stepping stone to becoming more united. Because just like the book said earlier, if you don't know the culture of the people that created these civilizations, you will never understand the civilization that was created. And if you don't understand it, you won't respect it, you won't empathize with it, you won't see how it's interdependent. Instead, you will try to take it over, or you will dismiss it. So, moving on to chapter 2, the Black founders of civilization. That is the name of chapter 2. The right side is Black, introverted. They bury the dead. They have grave offerings. They have ancestral communication, high recognition of women. Their strong point is trance or meditation. Their regards to socialism is high regard, and they believe in the celestial hierarchy. The left side is correlated with being white, extroverted. They cremate their dead or expose them to be eaten by animals. They're negative towards spirits, hold women and female power at low esteem, low regard to social stratification. And social stratification means like social norms or social rules. Like some stuff isn't against the law, it's just socially unacceptable, like being this close to someone when you talk. You know what I mean? Like that's not against the law, but I'd really rather not have you in my bubble. And I feel like you as a person should know that people like personal space. You know what I mean? That's what that means. Love of freedom from authority, separation of religion and spiritualism, separation of religion and spiritualism from institutions, restriction of time and day, and separation from healing. So the last one was pretty much talking about how religion has like a whole bunch of restrictions and regulations. Like you can only, well, I don't think it's you can only, but it's well known that you go to church on Sundays and Wednesdays, at specific times and certain holidays, and the religion you don't meditate in religion in the major churches. This is just referring to the major churches. Like I know there's a lot of smaller religions that are more directed inward and introverted, and there are some religions that have a balance, but we're talking about like the major ones that the majority follow. So a point I have on here is also another subtext in the question in the chapter, and it questions why is it important to know what races built what civilizations. Do you know why it's important to know what races built what civilizations?
Is it because they have a whole different point of view, or they do it differently?
Mm-hmm. They have their own ways, their own social customs and cultures to understand, and when you understand those, it helps you understand the motives and reasoning to their laws and decisions. Another reason that was addressed in the book is the white heirs, HEIRS, only accepted the external aspects and distorted the spiritual aspects of the civilizations. The current world's major religions are the left brain's attempt to do only what the right brain can do. So we are currently in a spiritual dark age. That's how the book refers to it. So right now, the left brain has attempted to conquer all the things that the right brain was in charge of, which is religion and nature and harmony. And when you have the left brain taking over those things, it's separating everything. And another reason why I have is the solution is to give back the spiritual doctrines and the religious practices to the black civilizations, reapply it to the institution's way of life. White civilizations prevented practices of religions that prohibited their desires and inspired women. So, to elaborate on that, a lot of black civilizations, their practices and their culture and their religion and everything was watered down because a lot of it prohibited the white civilizations from behaving the way they wanted to behave. And it also influenced their women. They held their women to a low regard. So when they went into a civilization that was treating their women well and had their women to a higher regard, they were like, hey, I don't want, you guys influencing our civilization and how we treat our women. And we don't want our women to think that they can, start doing the things that your women do. You know what I mean? Yeah, it's trash. In the book, it goes on to describe, like I said before, there's 3 fundamental races. You have your white race, which originated in North Europe and Northwest Asia. You have your black race that originated in South Europe and West Central Asia and Africa. And then Oriental, which is Northeast Asia and later America. Racial interception with whites, Eurasians, Arabs, and Kemet. And then the book goes on to describe the different black civilizations that had suffered the same fate of being conquered by the white race. It describes Canaan, Phoenicia, the Indus Valley. It talks about the stories in the Old Testament. It goes on to describe the sons of Noah, and there were 3 sons of Noah, and each son of Noah was supposed to be a representation of race. The Semites were Shem. European was, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I'm terrible with their names. Japheth. And the third one was Ham. And the issue with Ham was they would never, at first they wouldn't correlate him with being a Canaanite because of the civilization that was built there and how developed it was. But in the Bible, Ham was supposedly cursed with dark skin and big lips and kinky hair. It's supposed to be a curse to have, those features, the features of the black people. And that was supposed to be a consequence because he castrated God or something like that. And so in return, like all the qualities of a black man are a black man's curse. Anything you want to say about chapter 2?
I still have one thing.
Mm-hmm.
If we all are based on anything of a point of view, and like how we all have to work together to make an effort, what is even really stopping us from doing that? Or like, how hard would it be?
There's a lot of people in the world, and when you try to do love, it's always a balance, and the balance is bittersweet, because when there's always love, there's always going to be hate, and when there's positive, there's always going to be negative. So, and with that being said, it kind of makes it difficult to say that if it would ever be achieved, because we have accepted this idea of the necessity of the balance, regardless of what the opposing balance is. A balance is a balance, right?
Yeah,
everybody knows yang and all that stuff. So to say like how hard it would be, I think it would be really hard because of that balance. Like, you're never going to get the whole world on board, but if you can get the majority, I think that would be good enough. But everybody has their own idea of what that peace is, and that's another thing. Perception. Some people's perception of peace is for everyone to look and think and talk like them, because they feel like their way of life and their way of doing things is best. And there's a lot of people that think that in their own way. So we would have to be on one accord as to what peace is and what the cultural norm should be before we even get to that. So moving forward to chapter 3, this is the last chapter we read. It is called The Source of Light of the East. Do you have any notes for chapter 3 that you would like to share? I've been sharing all my notes.
I actually don't have any.
You don't have any notes for chapter 3? Okay. So on page 40, it says, through the distortion of history, there is a disconnect of cultures. An example is West African Yoruba deity Obatala and Dravidian goddess Tara, whose mantra is Om, and ancient Egyptian deity Osar, whose name conceals the mantra Om. So when you think about the origins of the ancient civilizations, you're able to correlate the similarities with their deities, with their way of life, and then you're able to correlate a lot of the modern religions and social norms with those that was developed by ancient civilization. And really, in a nutshell, this chapter was kind of talking about how everything kind of goes back to the black civilization. Like, black civilization started a lot of different things in religion and in science and mathematics and economics and plumbing and healthcare and funeral services.
And how some like parts of religion kind of come from it, like praying over food, or like being grateful for it.
The frequencies, talking to your food before you eat it and all that stuff. It's just that when their civilizations were taken over, their way of life was watered down. So that's what this episode that's what this chapter kind of goes over in a nutshell. Like it goes on to talk about Hinduism and how it's a combo of prehistoric West European religion with the African culture base. The earliest evidence of yogic practices go to 3000 BC. In the Indus Valley, Harappa. It was destroyed by the Aryans between 1500 and 800 BC. And during that time, the Aryans created a strict caste system, of course, putting themselves at the top of the caste system as priests and putting black people at the bottom of the caste system. And then they also outlawed black religions and talking to ancestors. And this is a repetition of a lot of different black created civilizations during this time. This was like a repeated history. And it goes on to talk about Buddhism and how Buddhism was started and ended with the same fate. And all the different sectors that came out of Buddhism was spread out throughout Asia. And that's pretty much chapter 3 in a nutshell. So overall, the first 3 chapters, they introduce the idea of the left and right brain. The hemisphere is also the willed and automatic part of your being, and they correlate it with the 3 main races, which is white, black, oriental,
and how they can help with civilization, and also knowing how religion comes into play.
It talks about the importance of interdependency of all of those beings, your left and right brain hemisphere, the willed and unwilled, and also about the 3 races. The interdependency is a must. And then it goes on to talk about how majority, if not all, religions date back to black civilizations. Also in the book, it talks about how, I remember someone on Facebook earlier was talking about how we shouldn't call ourselves black. But in the book, it talks about how we have always called ourselves black. We have called ourselves Hamites. We have called ourselves Negroes. We do that. That's something that we've always done, and it's no special reason why. I'm not sure. The book also talks about the majority of information material tells invalid truths and discredits the black man and its influences on civilizations. El was once the word for deity and canon, and once they were taken over, if you look at the word angel, El is at the end, and the names of the angels: Raphael, Michael, Archangel, Elohim. They all have El in it. So that was their fancy way of taking, the idea of ancestors out the picture and putting angels in the picture instead. A lot of things like that, a lot of examples like that in the different religions and the different civilizations. And what's happening is the left side of the brain, the white man, is taking over everything that the right side of the brain, the black man, is supposed to be controlling. So the left side is trying to control like the whole table, and that's not necessary. And that's what's creating the spiritual dark age and everything. And we don't need that. We don't need people conquering people and civilizations conquering civilizations. We need interdependency and unity and congregation. And that's what I got from the first 3 chapters. What is your summary of the first 3 chapters?
Almost the same as yours.
Almost the same as mine. You wasn't talkative that much this time, so we gonna do this a little bit better. I'm gonna talk a little less next
and
one.
I'm gonna up my game and I'll do the narrating.
Okay, and he gonna up his game next Sunday and do the narrating. So next Sunday at 5:00, we will be back here to talk about chapters 3 through 6. I will be posting the link for you guys if you want a free PDF file. You guys, for those that don't like to read on their computer screen, you could easily go to Staples or go to the library and print the chapters as we go along instead of just printing the whole book at one time. It's your world. It's up to you. You do what you want to do. Thanks for everybody for tuning in and waving and watching. We see you guys. We appreciate this. We would love y'all feedback and input as y'all are watching us. Ask some questions. Give us some input. Like, let's, pick each other's brains too. So this feel like a little less boring, at least for us. He over here yawning and stuff. So yeah.